Would you say that the goal here of the Belt and Road Initiative is more driven by foreign or domestic policy? Because this is one of the tensions that I'd sort of kept seeing popping up in the book, where like one thing would be sort of highlighted for or seem to be for like a specific domestic reason or something like local to that region, and then it would turn out then you sort of look at the bigger picture and perhaps it's part of like a wider attempt by China to it's not even like curry influence, it's like prevent opposition to their like other, shall we say, misgivings on the global stage. It's like, so what do you see driving this at the center? Do you think it's just both at the same time?
Well, I mean, the way I'd say I think about that, I'd say, well, what country does its foreign policy for entirely altruistic reasons? You know, most countries, to be honest, are quite selfish in this way, and understandably so. You know what I mean? You spend taxpayers' money, you're doing things, with in advance of your national interest. Politicians are voted in by their publics, or they're ruling over their publics if they're in an authoritarian context. So they have to answer to their public, and that's the kind of priority. So I think from the Chinese perspective, the whole concept of the Belt and Road is about, about, as I say, engaging with the world and engaging with the world through this vision of connectivity and prosperity. But it has solipsistic interests within that. It's about Chinese companies going out into the world and getting some experience and getting opportunities in the world. Within China, there's a narrative that, in the early years of the Belt and Road, one of the big pushes was construction. And this was in part because there'd been a real surfeit of construction at home in China. And so you had a lot of companies that were kind of starting to run out of stuff to do, and you need to keep them occupied. And these are big companies employing hundreds of people, hundreds of thousands of people, and the Chinese government needs to keep them moving. And so this is a way, you extend a loan to country X to build a road, and you put within that, contract a stipulation that, you will use one of our companies to do that. And so that helps kind of keep the company employed and keeps the money circulating and, keeps them good. And I'd say this isn't unique to the Chinese. The idea of linked loans is something that lots of other countries do as well. It's, quite a frequent stipulation, and it makes sense. You're not just trying to give money away. You're trying to make sure that your system benefits. Again, publics don't appreciate it if you're just kind of throwing your nation's wealth to other poorer countries. It's something you think about. In the UK, there's a big debate about raising or lowering the percentage of GDP that's spent on aid. It's a controversial question. I can well understand it. So I think that the whole point about this is really about it is about China kind of externalizing. And I think the point about Central Asia specifically is I think that for Central Asia is particularly important within this context. So when you think about an African context or you think about a European context, they're kind of far away, and so there's distance. And so the kind of Belt and Road stuff there is important, but it's important in different ways in a way. Whereas in Central Asia, it's next door. And it's a part of the world that China is intimately attached to, both in terms of sharing direct borders, but also in terms of, communities. So, in the countries of Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan all share borders directly with China. There are Tajik communities in China. There are Kyrgyz communities in China. There's about 1 million Kazakhs in China. And these are ethnically Kazakh people. And similarly, there are ethnically Chinese people living on the other side of the border. Now, some of them are quite recent migrants, but some of them go back. The point is, China is very tied to this part of the world. And so the investments here, the kind of Belt and Road stuff here, has a different level of kind of importance in a way, because it is tied to kind of domestic stability, specifically in trying to bring prosperity to Xinjiang, but also because this is not a part of the world where the borders are as clean as you see kind of drawn on the ground. I mean, there is a specific border, it's police and it's guarded and so on and so forth. But the communities and the interlinkages are quite strong back and forth and go back quite a long way, and means that, it's a part of the world that China is really kind of intimately tied to. And so therefore it makes all of the projects and investments there important in kind of direct ways as well as being, about doing projects next door. The final point I'd add on this, of course, is, the other aspect that's important in the Central Asian context is Central Asia is a very mineral-rich area, and China is a country that consumes a lot of minerals. And so that's always an important sort of connection that's quite specific to this part of the world as well.
Mhm. How much? So in the book, you kind of talk about this waning Russian Soviet influence, sort of since the fall of obviously the fall of the Soviet Union in 91. I'm going to say 91.
It was, yeah.
the
Dissolution was in 91, yeah.
and yeah, the Berlin Wall came down 91 as well, actually, didn't it? Yeah,
Yes.
pretty sure.
Gosh, I should know that.
Because you two were flying in to record Achtung Baby just as the wall came down. They were the last flight into old East Berlin. That would have been a bit of a thing to be on.
Yeah,
Yeah,
quite a trip.
yeah. So the so this waning of influence from Russia has obviously been accompanied by China attempting to expand their sphere of influence in the region. How much do you think they've succeeded? Because I kind of got the feeling that there had been perhaps like early enthusiasm for investment from China that had kind of waned as people had seen the ways in which the companies that had been expanding into this region had sort of conducted business. It wasn't, they were there to do the job. The workers were there to send the money home. There wasn't like I don't know, there wasn't like a bigger integration than perhaps there could have been. So like how much control do you think China has, like soft power or geopolitically or economically even, over this region?
I mean, look, I think China is the most consequential actor increasingly on the ground. I think that, Russia will always, well, not always, I think, eventually it might shift, but Russia has a very strong influence on the region. I don't think there's any getting away from that. I think, the institutions that a lot of the regional countries are members of are Russian controlled. I mean, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is kind of the exception. And even in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Russians are members as well. And, Russia is still the country that they turn to for example, security questions. So if I think of, what we've seen happen over the past year, the fall of Kabul to the Taliban, the chaos in Kazakhstan at the beginning of the year, the country that came with military aid in both cases was Russia. Russia rushed through a whole series of arms sales to the Central Asians as Kabul was falling. Russia started a joint training exercise with the Uzbeks and the Tajiks, both of whom share borders with Russia. With Afghanistan. They were the ones who stepped in and did that. When Kazakhstan had its trouble at the beginning of the year, where you had some protests there that escalated into really widespread violence, which the government kind of lost control of, the leader had to ask Russia to send some forces under the banner of something called the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which is kind of another post-Soviet construction that brings together a number of the sort of former Soviet states in a kind of sort of NATO-ish alliance, but it's nowhere near as kind of developed as NATO. It was Russian forces that deployed. It wasn't Chinese ones. And so, Russia still has a very important role to play in the region, and it continues to have a strong connection there. And of course, Russian is still a very widely spoken language across the region. And, there's huge amounts of migrant laborers that go to Russia. And if you look at like a country like Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan, depending on the calculations, like a third of their GDP is generated by remittances from migrant labor. So young men and women from these countries going to work in Moscow and then sending money home. In Uzbekistan as well, it's a smaller proportion of GDP, but it's a huge amount of money. And, you're talking about 6 million people who basically live and work in Russia, sending money back to the region. So Russia has a very strong connection there. I don't want to discount that. But I think if you look at China and the way China's influence has grown over the past few years, it is clearly the one that is coming with the new big development projects. It is the one that's offering new roads, new tunnels, new big loans extended by its policy banks, which then its companies can come and develop, companies come and build. It is, and that's been the story for, the past, I'd argue 15, 20 years almost now, right? But it's a constant story of sort of constant upwards trajectory from a Chinese perspective. Now, how's that received by the locals? Well, I always found at a governmental level, it was pretty well received, actually. These are countries that need investment, frankly. They have infrastructure problems. They have, things they want to build, things they want to do. And there aren't that many lenders out there. I mean, there's, some European ones and some American ones. And that's, something that they do tap regularly. But, China, the kind of level of investment that China offers sometimes, and the level of kind of opportunities it offers is different in some ways and is more substantial and comes often with less strings attached, which they like. So, at a governmental level, I always found positive perspectives of let's try to get China in and try to get Chinese investment. Where you find negative things at the grassroots level, where you'd find often where the project had been implemented, there were problems. Like, I remember stories in Kyrgyzstan of infrastructure, of, energy projects or refineries that were being built, which had kind of polluted local waterways, and really done a lot of damage. And the locals, were suffering as a result of that. Or in other cases where you'd see regular stories of spats between locals and Chinese workers who were working on similar companies together because, they were unhappy with the treatment by the Chinese company, and that was kind of a problem that they were encountering. And in other cases, you'd find people complaining that they weren't getting jobs or the benefits they're expecting from the Chinese companies. And I remember in one particularly catastrophic incident, there was a big the power station in Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan that was refurbished by a Chinese firm. And then in the middle of winter, it conked out. Now this is the Eurasian steppe. This is not a warm place in winter. This climate is what cold weather clothing was designed for. So to have an energy station conk out in the middle of winter, not a good look. And then when they looked into it, they discovered there'd been massive corruption around the project and huge amount of wastage and so on. So there have been some pretty big problems there. And so that does, of course, translate into sort of unhappiness on the ground. But the other side to that offer is that there have also been some really game-changing projects. Some of the infrastructure that's been built has really transformed connectivity and transformed the lives of people in these countries. In parts of in Tajikistan, for example, some of the agriculture projects that have been done have basically rehabilitated land that was no longer arable. That now means you get all-round, vegetables in the markets there, whereas previously you didn't in certain parts of the year. There's tunnels that they built in Uzbekistan or in Tajikistan that have connected parts of the country that are going to save, in the longer term, millions of man hours in terms of journeys. So there are some real benefits that come from the infrastructure there, but there are also problems. And unfortunately, for a lot of locals, it's the problems that you see, that end up ultimately being the ones that bother. So I always found this kind of dual perspective, where at a governmental level, there's sort of leadership, elite level, they're broadly quite positive. But when you got down to the grassroots level, you did find pockets of complaints, but you also found pockets of people who found real opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's probably always the case with these things, that, it's not one good or bad thing. Like, there'll be some people who have managed to benefit from it. There'll always be winners and losers. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment for us in the comments below. Let me know what you thought and if you'd like to see more of this from the show. Thank you, and we'll see you again next time.